All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep, deep into a comedy classic. One that's had people laughing for, well, decades now. We're talking Up in Smoke with Cheech and Chong. I think what's really interesting is we're not just going to watch it again. We're going to figure out what makes this movie still so funny, after all this time. Yeah, exactly. We're going way past just like, hey, remember that scene? Our source material this time is this YouTube video discussion with some seriously hardcore fans. I mean, these guys even saw Cheech and Chong live back in the day, which, I mean, that's what's so cool about this movie, right? It's like each generation seems to find it and they connect with that same humor. It's pretty cool. Okay, so before we really get into all the hazy details of the movie, let's give our listeners some background here. Who are Cheech and Chong? Where'd they come from? Whoa, you got to go back to the 60s, that whole counterculture scene, a lot of experimentation. They were this comedy duo, and they spent like a decade honing their act before they even got a record deal. Wow, 10 years. I mean, they must have had something special going on. What was so different about them back then? It was this perfect mix of sketch comedy and music. They were kind of like a pro Saturday Night Live, but decidedly more herbal. And that's really where their legacy, comes in, I think. It's not that whole stoner comedy thing. Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important when we say stoner comedy, we're not just talking about like jokes about getting high, right? It's a whole genre that uses cannabis culture as this backdrop for humor. Yeah. Often with satire, absurdity, really sharp observational comedy. And I think Cheech and Chong didn't just use this style. They practically invented it. You can see their influence on so much that came after. I mean, everything from Kevin Smith movies, especially Jay and Silent Bob, to even Tenacious D. Yeah, totally. They really set the stage for a whole generation of comedian. But let's get back to Up in Smoke. This was not your typical Hollywood production, at all. It was almost like anti-Hollywood. Yeah, I've always wondered about that. What was it about making this movie that was so different? Well, first off, Tommy Chong was actually an uncredited co-director, which I think explains why the movie has such a loose, spontaneous feel to it, So all those scenes that feel so off the cuff, they're just making it up as they go, that's Chong's influence. Oh, absolutely. I mean, take that whole Lost in Tijuana sequence. It just feels so genuinely unplanned, it's chaotic, and it's just so funny, and that's what gives the movie such a unique charm. And you can't forget, the marketing challenges. It wasn't like they could just put up billboards with a giant joint. Oh no, they had to get creative. Instead of traditional advertising, they left comic strips at bus stops. It was like guerrilla marketing, which just adds to that whole outsider feel of the film. They were doing things their own way right from the start. Speaking of doing things their own way, some interesting choices made in the editing room. Remember that whole deleted subplot with Harry Dean Stanton? Oh yeah, he was gonna play a prison guard, tried to sell drugs to Cheech and Chong. Wild how stuff like that ends up on the cutting room floor, Crazy. I get why they cut it though. The courtroom scene, I mean, that's already so funny without the extra context of a crooked prison guard, Yeah, I think. Sometimes less is more, but the characters that did make it in are just so unforgettable. Like Sergeant Studenko, played by Stacy Keach. Yeah, perfect example of Cheech and Chong's genius, comedic genius. He's way more than just your typical drugs are bad cop killer. No, you think he's going to be this straight-laced authority figure, but they flip it. He's this bumbling, incompetent guy who's constantly wrestling with his team who are equally incompetent. And then, oh man, that scene where he gets involuntarily pulled into the stoned party at the end, pure comedic gold. It's the perfect payback for his uptight attitude the whole time. And speaking of unforgettable characters, what about Strawberry? Tom Skerritt. He's only in a few scenes, but I mean, he drops some of the most iconic lines in the entire movie. Oh, are you talking about the Ajax scene? Don't worry, man. It's mostly Maui Waui, but it's got some Labrador in it. I mean, come on. How do you even come up with that? It's perfect. It's this perfect blend of relatable humor and these completely outlandish situations. They take something so simple, mistaking cleaning powder for cocaine and turn it into this absurd, hilarious moment. Okay, we gotta talk about those iconic scenes, those gags. The car made entirely out of weed. Who thinks of this stuff? It's peak Cheech and Chong absurdity, right? And they play completely straight. There's no winking at the camera, no acknowledging how ridiculous it is. Yeah, it's like they live in this world where a weed car is just a normal thing. And those little details they throw in, the license plate, 2CALI. So good. They weren't even trying to be subtle. They went all in on the absurdity, and it works. It's like a giant middle finger to, authority and anyone who takes themselves too seriously. But it's not just about those crazy gags. That car scene, like the one with the giant joint, a prime example of how they blend that slapstick with really clever wordplay. Like that Labrador joke isn't just random. It plays on what you expect about weed strains and origins and stuff. They're smart about their humor. They are. They are masters of comedic timing and delivery. Yeah. And they know how to use visual gags to just enhance the humor. Like the scene where their joint accidentally ends up with the nuns. No, nah, yeah. The visual of them driving off with this giant joint sticking out the window. It's just priceless. It's a little sacrilegious, but I mean, hey, it's Cheech and Chong. You're going to get a little bit of irreverence, of course. Yeah, but Up in Smoke isn't just about these outrageous gags and poking fun at authority. It also captures this specific time, this attitude, that carefree, rebellious spirit of like the 70s. And that's what those YouTube commentators really nailed. They talked about how each generation kind of discovers and enjoys this movie in their own way. It's not just like nostalgia for people who lived through that time. Right. It speaks to this universal experience of, wanting to break free, like to experiment, to find your own path, even if it means getting into a little trouble on the way. What's interesting to me is how they portray like freedom. It's not just about doing whatever you want. It's about challenging expectations and finding humor in like defying what you're supposed to do. I mean, like celebrating being different, even if it makes some people uncomfortable. Yeah. And that's why I think the movie still resonates today. It's not just a time capsule. It's this reminder that it's okay to be yourself, to laugh at the absurdity of life, to not take things too seriously. That hangout vibe is huge too. To understand why it became such a cult classic. It's not just about the laughs, it's about the feeling you get while watching it. It's like you're right there with Cheech and Chong, going along for the ride, laughing at their, misadventures. And those YouTubers, they mentioned something really interesting. They said that while Up in Smoke is definitely Cheech and Chong's most popular movie, they actually prefer Next Movie. Really? That's interesting. Well, maybe that's a deep dive for another day. But getting back to their legacy, I mean, think about this. They were still doing bits from Up in Smoke in their live act decades later. Yeah. That says a lot about the staying power of their comedy. It became like cultural touchstones, shared and enjoyed across generations. They created something really special. Up in Smoke, it's a landmark comedy that continues to be relevant, entertaining after all these years. And it's not just about the weed humor. It's the characters, it's the dialogue, it's those unforgettable gags, it's that message of, rebellion, nonconformity. Plus, let's be honest, sometimes you just need a good laugh. Totally. And Up in Smoke delivers that, like in spades. Yeah. But there's also a deeper layer to it. It's almost like social commentary disguised as these hilarious misadventures, makes you think about what we consider normal and what we expect in a way that's both funny and thought-provoking. So what do you think? Listener, what do you think? Why does this kind of humor still work today? What is it about Cheech and Chong's brand of comedy that just like transcends time and generations? It's a great question, isn't it? I mean, maybe some things are just funny no matter what era. Or maybe it speaks to this need for humor that challenges authority, pokes fun at the establishment, finds the absurdity in everyday life. I think it's a bit of both. I think Up in Smoke, it reminds us not to take ourselves too seriously, to embrace the absurd and to always be open to a good laugh. And in a world that can feel, way too serious and stressful, that's a powerful message. Yeah. Will said. We've covered a lot of ground here, from their comedic beginnings to the impact of Up in Smoke. But I mean, there's still so much to unpack, right? We talked about the iconic scenes, the characters. But what about the movie's message? What is Up in Smoke really trying to say about society, about conformity, about the pursuit of happiness? That's a great question, and one we're definitely going to explore as we continue to deep dive into this comedy classic. So stick with us. We're just getting warmed up. When you really look at Up in Smoke, it's more than just a silly stoner comedy. There's like this real subversive streak running through it. Totally. Like they're using humor to kind of challenge all these uptight, societal norms and expectations. Like that opening scene where Cheech is having this totally disastrous morning. It's relatable, it's kind of gross, but it sets the tone for the whole movie, Expect the unexpected. Exactly. They're telling you right off the bat, this isn't going to be your typical, by the books comedy. We're breaking the rules. Come along for the ride. And the way they do the cops too, it's brilliant. They're not just the bad guys, they're totally incompetent. Often the butt of the joke, turning that whole authority figure thing on its head. This classic Cheech and Chong, right? They're not afraid to make fun of, the people in charge. And that scene where they accidentally play a gig for the LAPD, pure satire. Man, legendary scene. The way they flip the whole situation around and get everyone, even the cops, high. It's like they're saying, even the people who are supposed to be upholding the law can't resist a good time. And it's all done with this playful, mischievous energy, not mean-spirited, just highlighting how absurd it all is. That's what makes it work, I think. Subversive without being preachy. Those YouTube guys made a good point about the ending too. They talked about how it's not your typical Hollywood happy ending. Cheech and Chong don't really win in the traditional sense. They're still driving around in that crazy van, still getting into trouble, but they're doing it on their own terms. They've chosen this life of freedom, non-conformity, and they seem pretty happy with it. Like they're saying, screw the establishment, we're making our own rules, and that resonated with those commentators big time. They talked about how the ending is actually kind of hopeful. Yeah, it's a celebration of just being yourself, rejecting all that pressure to fit in, and that's just as relevant now as it was back then. One thing that always gets me about Up in Smoke is the music. It's not just background noise. It's a huge part of the movie's identity. Oh yeah. I mean, remember, they started as a musical comedy duo, so it makes sense that music would be, front and center in their films. And the soundtrack is just this perfect blend of their signature style, that laid-back feel with that classic 70s rock vibe. It's like the music is another character, setting the mood, driving the action, adds to the whole, carefree rebellion vibe. It's true. And it's interesting how Up in Smoke kind of set the stage for all those other stoner comedies that came after. I mean, Pineapple Express, This Is the End, they owe a lot to Cheech and Chong. Oh, huge debt. I mean, they created a blueprint. You see their influence on everything. Character types, the pacing, the music. But there's something about Up in Smoke that just feels, I don't know, timeless. Even though it's so 70s. Why do you think that is? Yeah. What do you think? I think it's the combination of their chemistry, their comedic chemistry, their ability to tap into those themes of, rebellion, not fitting in, and the fact that they never take themselves too seriously, they're just having fun. And that energy, that translates, no matter what generation you are, I think. And it's not just about the humor. There's real heart to the movie too. You end up caring about these characters, and even though they're constantly doing stupid stuff, you root for them, even when they're making terrible decision, they're lovable rogues. Yeah, you can't help but be charmed. And the fact that they stayed friends, collaborators, for so many years after Up in Smoke says a lot about their real bond. That translates on screen, makes it feel real. And let's be real, the movie wouldn't be half as funny without their comedic timing, The way they bounce off each other, the improv moments, the facial expressions, it's magic. Oh, total masters of understatement, comedic understatement. They can say something with a completely straight face and you're on the floor. That's hard to do. Have you ever noticed how they use silence too? Sometimes the funniest moments are when they just look at each other and you can practically hear them thinking. Oh, it's true. They let the joke breathe, let the audience fill in the blanks. That takes confidence, trust in your material, trust in the audience. We've talked a lot about the humor, but Up in Smoke also has this really cool kind of visual style, the way they use color, lighting, camera angles to create this hazy, surreal atmosphere. It's almost like you're watching a fever dream, It's true. And it works so well with the tone of the movie. It's trippy, it's disorienting, it's fun. They're not afraid to experiment, to push the boundaries. And that's what makes Up in Smoke so unique. We've been deep diving into Up in Smoke for a while now. What about you, listener? What moments stand out? Is it a scene, a line, a gag? What is it about this movie that makes you laugh, think, or just, feel good? And hey, if you haven't seen Up in Smoke yet, what are you waiting for? It's a classic. It's funny. It's thought-provoking. It's a reminder to, not take life too seriously. But be warned, might change how you see the world, or at least make you laugh a little harder at the absurdities. And hey, if you have seen it, Maybe it's time for a rewatch. Sometimes all you need is a good laugh and a giant joint made of weed to remind you, life's too short to be anything but yourself. You really hit it there. It's more than just the laughs, right? There's this real warmth, this camaraderie between them. Like you're hanging out with them, just going along for the ride. Like they're inviting you into their little counterculture club. Totally. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? Right. They make rebellion look fun, effortless, and hilarious. That's why it's become this cultural touchstone, I think. It's not just a movie. It's a symbol of like a whole time and attitude. It's funny when you think about it, Up in Smoke came out when, I mean, attitudes towards cannabis were way different. Oh yeah, it was a lot more taboo. And yet here's this movie that's basically celebrating it. And it became huge. It's wild, right? It shows you the power of humor. Yeah. To like break down those barriers, challenge what's considered normal. They weren't afraid to push things, and they did it in a way that was funny and made you think. They were pioneers, really. They paved the way for us to talk about cannabis more openly and honestly, and they did it with a smile and, a joint in hand. I love that. One scene, I think, really sums up that whole rebellion, that nonconformities, that battle of the bands at the end. It's pure chaos. Their band, Alice Bowie, up there in these crazy costumes, doing this like over-the-top rock opera. Oh man, epic scene. And how the van catches fire, accidentally gets everyone high, including the cops. It's like the perfect way to bring all of the beings together. Right. They're saying, we're doing things our way, even if it means setting the world on fire. Yeah. And in that moment, everyone, even the authority figures, are united through laughter, through that feeling of freedom. And it's beautiful. Sometimes the best way to challenge the way things are is to just laugh at them. But Up in Smoke is also a kind of love letter to friendship. Slowly, through all those crazy adventures, the car chases, the cops, their bond is unbreakable. Yeah, they're always there for each other, even when they're driving each other nuts. It's a testament to how friendship can get you through anything, even a giant joint made of weed. You get that right. And that's a message that still matters, right? We all need friends who'll be there, make us laugh, go on those crazy adventures, even if those adventures mean getting lost in Tijuana or accidentally setting a van on fire. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Up in Smoke, listener, I want to leave you with this. The movie might be over 40 years old, but its message about rebelling, about friendship, about finding humor in the absurdity of it all, it's more relevant than ever. So next time you're stressed out, overwhelmed, or just need a good laugh, put on Up in Smoke. Let Cheech and Chong take you on that wild ride, remind you not to take life too seriously. And maybe, just maybe, they'll inspire you to, embrace that little rebel inside you. Who knows? You might even learn a thing or two about friendship, about cannabis culture, and about the power of a good laugh. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, stay hazy, stay funny, and stay true to yourself.